One of the gardens which is in part of my responsibility was in Chippendale, and I went down there one day and they've planted citrus, and there's this thorny citrus tree, and I was looking at it. There's a city saying, oh, you know, don't plant poisonous things, don't plant thorny things, because people will complain to council when their kids get stung. And this guy came out the apartment block and he said, oh, you're looking at the citrus? Yeah, I put that thorny one in. And he said, why I did it, the first one I put in was stolen. The second one I put in was stolen. This one's been in here for a long time now and it's not going to be stolen. And I didn't say anything, you know, it is out, it wasn't coming over the walkway, so it wasn't really a problem, so I just left it. But the theft of young fruit trees, especially citrus, is rife on footpath gardens and in community gardens. So what they did in a couple areas to thwart this, they got some stainless steel wire they used for bike locks. They wrapped that around about 4 bricks, dug a deep hole, put the bricks in the bottom, wrapped the wire around the tree base, or the seedling. When the trees are bigger, they're okay. And then planted the tree, so like it's held in there with bricks. Now you can still steal it or destroy it, but you're going to have to do a lot of work to get it. So there's strategies for dealing with tree thieves apart from the more vigorous ones. That's in Wilga Avenue, Marrickville. And that's garden's got its own story. There's a woman who lives just behind here who works at TAFE and she teaches organic gardening. And you know her name? Yeah, I'm sure you do. She teaches at Petersham TAFE. Been teaching gardening for years, yeah, anyway. She was one of the instigators of this. And it was a boring footpath of concrete, you know. Really great, Marrickville, heat of Sydney summer. There's all this thermal mass absorbing all this heat energy and you have to turn your air conditioner up to keep your house cool. So the locals got together, they got a concrete cutter and they removed 1/3 of the footpath, the concrete, and planted it. Didn't tell council. Then they invited the mayor around, curious to see what reaction would be with the press. And the mayor said something like, this is excellent, we need to roll this out. So it's a good tale. That won't happen at all councils. But so places for people to spend time on the streets. Like I was there when I was taking these photos, I was there, there's a mature, a lemon tree. No, an orange tree, about 5 meters tall, growing there. And I was looking at it, it's in fruit, and this Greek guy came out, started talking, and he said, yeah, I planted that 15 years ago. And there it is bearing fruit and shading the footpath. And shading's important because there's this thing called the urban heat island effect. Do people know that? In summer, the hard paving like this, roofs, buildings absorb heat. So the buildings get very hot. So people turn up their air conditioners to keep cool. And you've got this huge energy drain. So any council or anybody wishing to reduce carbon emissions, shady trees are good. That's why a lot of councils use London plains. They're ideal. They thrive in polluted environments, in the urban environment. They're deciduous. They let the light in summer, so it warms it, so you don't need so much internal heating. They cast shade. Yeah, and they cast shade in summer, London plain. And so they help reduce that urban heat island effect. Yeah. This is a minimalist footpath garden. This is in Redfern. It's one plant on a back lane just near the James Street Community Garden in the reserve there. But it's the only living thing in that lane. I like it. That would appeal to your sense of quirky humour, wouldn't it, Mary? This is one which I did at the city, which this is the road closure in Arthur Street, Surrey Hills, just off the cafe strip on Crown Street. And the locals, one of the women who lives just there, sort of sent an email saying, how do you feel if we took over the footpath, there's 2 planters, the planters in the road closure? And I said, well, that's quite possible under the community garden policy. So I went out and had a look. And so, yeah, they seemed a bunch of them met us. They thought about maintenance. They were clearly motivated to do it. So I just rang up the depot and said, well, how do you guys feel about this? It's in the policy and your staff maintain it. It was planted to agapanthus, a remarkably boring plant that councils like to put in because it's a set and forget plant. And they said, yeah, if the people are going to look after it, they can have it. We'll get the gardener up there. He'll take out all the agapanthus and go and put them in another park somewhere and leave it bare. And they did. And I took out the woman who runs the city's matching grants and got them, and so they filled out a grant application to get a little bit of startup capital. And it's going well. They now want to build raised gardens. So that's brought the community interest, and the local school's interested in it. It's, that's not a good photo, I'm sorry. It's shady. There's casuarinas. The bricks are slippery. When I went out and had a look, it was slippery, and one of them told me how her grandmother slipped on it, and a cyclist came down off the street, turned into it, and he just kept going sideways. So I had to get the depot out to treat the bricks to get rid of them. Is it like a lichen or moss that grows on them? Yeah. This is in Redfern, a boring back lane made unboring because the people got sick of it being so boring. They did this without council approval, and it's really nice. So it's mostly the back. These often aren't garages, they're just garage doors that give onto the back courtyard. But some of the houses front it, very small houses, if you know Redfern. But the people just got together and planted the street out. Then they got together and came to council to see if they could have half the pocket park to start the James Street Reserve Community Garden, which is one of the most productive gardens I've seen. So that's what you can do to a back lane. And you can be arty, you can get junk. If there's any artist here, I apologise for the term. Found objects and stick them on the wall and even put plants along the top of your wall. So, and paint bright colours. It was a boring grey lane, so they've got stuff in bright purple and red. They just painted the back walls. And that's a very social thing you can have a party at. And that's just planters, anything they could scrounge to grow things in. Do you like it or not?
Yeah, I love it. In the picture previous, how did they get over any issues with access?
It's a footpath this wide. It's not a footpath, it's a service edge. You couldn't possibly walk along it because people have put lampposts, telegraph wires down it. So that didn't come into it. The street's used by the garbage collection people, so that's the street's clear. Okay, this is back in Chippendale. They wanted to put in some raised gardens, and without council approval. But before that, I'd spoken to them about offsets, and knowing full well what they're going to do. And this is what they did. They've got half a metre from the curb, so you can get into your car. There used to be a garden, I think, around one of these trees. We made a deal, because somebody rang up and complained about it being a trip hazard. So we made the deal. We said, if you remove that garden from around the tree base, we'll give you the road blister down the road to garden. And that was too good a bargain to miss. They got 4 times the area. And so they pulled it out. It was gone by the end of the week. And now the curb's got citrus and vegetables growing in it. The other thing they did, they made it above trip hazard height. This is 0.45 of a metre high. It's well put together. You can see that. So it can be bashed a bit and it won't just disintegrate. It's durable. The other thing it's got is, not this one, but the other one down further, they painted it a light green, so there's contrast with the grey of the asphalt. So for visually impaired people, they got more of a clue to see it.
What sort of timber is it, Dave?
I think that's a hardwood. Hardwoods are better, but this crew tend to make things out of freight pellets. And freight pellets, you can get some good hardwood ones, but a lot of them are softwood, and they're going to have, unless you treat the wood with some sort of coating, it'll have limited life. They've been making vertical gardens by putting sacks filled with soil inside freight pellets and stacking them up.
What sort of coating?
It'd have to be a polyurethane or something. And they've left 1.5 metre for the footpath, so it doesn't block people with pushers and wheelchairs. And I actually quite like it. You know, obviously some people in council didn't like it because nobody asked permission.
It's good being taller, isn't it? It looks good being taller.
Well, yeah. And if you made it wider, like the one out in the garden here with a panel on the top, you could use it as a seat if you had 2 close together. So, and you can see there's planted of food and nasturtiums and herbs. They actually grow weeds here because they have a wild food weed tour occasionally. There's a guy around Sydney, I've forgotten his name, who does that. Who? Diego, yeah. So they cultivate weeds, and they've got little interpretive signs saying edible weed, blah, you know, its botanic name and its common name and how it's used. So that's, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good model. And if you really want to, you can paint it periodically or treat it. This is the rest of some of their footpath garden. This is down Myrtle Street, put in by the Sustainable Chippendale crew. And this was done years ago with the city as a trial. And trials are really useful things. You might notice we've got if you go to Barrett House on the tour, the eastern suburbs tour, you'll notice there is a footpath garden. It's called the Barrett House Footpath Foragers Garden, a trial planting by. Because trials are good, because you don't have to get all this development approval, and trials don't have an end date, unless you're silly enough to make one. Trials can be very long. In fact, trials can be permanent.
As long as it beats the string.
Yeah. Depends on your council, if we can get away with it. But yeah, so you can see they've planted citrus, and they've got native plants and exotics and herbs, edible weeds, pawpaw, avocado, I'm trying to think what else, tamarillo, you know, the tree tomato. So this was a good trial, and they mulch it. The city would supply them with mulch. Anybody who does this, what they used, supplied with was sugarcane mulch rather than legume, the alfalfa, what's it called? Lucerne or pea straw, because that's cut long, and when it rains and it's carried into the drain, it blocks up the drains. So they started requesting shortcut sugarcane mulch.
Just asking, you know, what's happened down there though is the soil level's built up way higher than the ground level. So there's always the potential of
erosion
and stuff like that. So given that, and given, you know, that's the lack of effectiveness within that, what would be you know, a design remediation for the next stage of the trial?
Ideally building it up as a raised garden.
At the moment there is going to be a deleterious kind of effect.
There is. And I've got a picture in here somewhere showing how they address that, but not totally successfully. I think raised gardens are better. Especially because it lifts the root zones of most vegetables up above any spot contamination in the soil. So
They could do that all down the street, wouldn't they? Because that looks like an isolated feature if they were all down the street.
there's about 4, yeah. They are all down one part of the street. And like, if you've got any arty people down there and they have access to them, you know, they can do marvellous things with colour and mosaics and stuck on bits of stuff. You can see they've put a community compost bin at the end. These are the ones you used to get complaints about. And the local artist, it is a dull olive green. It's an area bin if people know the technology. And so the local artist has made it something really nice. And she did that to a couple of them. There are problems with those bins, if you want to talk community composting.
I'll talk about that tomorrow.
Okay. Oh, you're going to do that?
I was going to mention that tomorrow.
Oh, good. Oh, I'll shut up then.
I'm not here tomorrow. Can we do it now?
Well, we tried one, I'll be really quick guys, we tried one of these in our community garden, they're about $300.
No, they're about 360, 50, 60, yeah.
So they've got this big phallus that goes up through the middle, which is the idea that it aerates the entire thing. Now, I've just found you have to mix them as much as you have to mix anything else. The stuff
That's exactly what they do.
The stuff as far as the drainage point down the base of it is very underweight, so it's about a 10 mil variety, so it very quickly clogs up. So you spend all this money and they haven't spent $20 on actually getting the drainage right.
Mm.
It's not going into the soil, so if anything goes wrong, you don't actually have those other beneficials or worms.
All the organisms.
Those things moving up. So after about 6 months of me going through and getting sick of this thing, we actually pulled it apart. Now, when pulling it apart, what was really interesting, when you took a horizontal ladder, the middle next to the big phallus going up the middle was rock hard. On the same level, you could have it 2 wet with worms. Now, I know somebody else in the room is going to say, well, why didn't you mix it? Why didn't you turn it? Okay, so most of our garden members are about this tall.
Mm.
Most of them are women.
Yeah.
This bin is this high.
Yep.
So you're asking them to screw into this thing and do that. So I just...
And you tend to knock over that thing in the middle.
Yeah, and then you knock over the...
I think I've seen area bins used quite well in community gardens, but they're by people who know how to compost. And Dave, I don't know if you'll agree with this. I think the volume is quite small for the size of the device.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if you compare it to the pig,
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, if you compare it, there's one called the Big Pig, which we've been
Yep.
trying. That's by far the Rolls Royce of composting system.
And priced as a Rolls Royce too.
Yeah, priced like a Rolls Royce.
You need a grant to buy it. Look, I'm sorry about the light. You can't see the colour. This is back in Wilga Avenue. These are just examples. Typical Wilga Avenue Federation House with the, and this is this TAFE woman, so it's nice, with the vegetables and young fruit trees growing on the footpath. So they haven't done offsets because they've got driveways, which you don't have in Chippendale. It was built in the horse and buggy days. This is from the early days of cars. But you can see they've also made footpaths there that look really nice. They're paved, but they're made of rocks or concrete lumps, and they look nice. So it looks good. And one thing, irrespective of your feeling about aesthetics, which of course are totally, there's really no way to judge aesthetics. There's no objective data. It's all subjective perception. The thing with that is it looks good, and if you can tell councils how good it looks, they'll be happy, because people will ring up and say, there's a messy garden down the road. What's a messy garden? Other people say, no, this is a forest garden. It's based on the structure of the forest, but the other person thinks it's messy because it's not in straight rows. You can't win. This is a garden again, and they've got things stuck in it like this old drum, pots, but the footway's clear, there's no stuff overhanging. And overhangs, you need to keep things clear with a footway. Below 3 metres is what people are, the consensus that's coming out. So you can have it branching over the footway but not below, and especially not low enough for kids in pushes. So you can see they've got herbs, they've got veggies, there's, these are citrus trees, there's olives up the road. That's Wilga Avenue in Marrickville. That's Wilga Avenue in Marrickville. And that's Sarah Van Erp. If people know Sarah, she's here tomorrow. She's the Waste Education Coordinator at City of Sydney. So once again, that's a citrus tree on the, an olive tree seedling and cabbages under it and herbs. Now, irrigation. What's that? 100 mil ag pipe. And what the other, that's connected at the other end to the downpipe on a house, and there's a series of houses. And it's taken under the paving, under the concrete paving of the footpath, and zigzagged through the garden. Now this is flexible pipe, it's plastic, long life, and it's got little holes in it to let water out, and hopefully keep soil in, to let water out, and hopefully to keep the soil out of it. So what they've done, they've intercepted the downpipe from the houses, taken it through the garden bed, where it irrigates a garden when it rains, and then they've lifted it up just near the curb, so when it's raining you get that surge of excess water. So water has to go somewhere. You've got to be really careful with water. Water travels. It has a starting point and an end point, and you've got to work with it, and everything's got to be the right diameter. If you have 4 days of continuous rain, that's a 10 centimetre, 100 mil pipe. That'll be powering. So, and it puts excess water into the drain. When your garden's what they call field capacity, it's water saturated, that's excess water goes somewhere. If it doesn't go anywhere, it erodes and undermines footpaths, house bases. This is another garden in Darlinghurst. People got a small grant to put it in a Darlinghurst lane. It's not far off Oxford Street, and it's got a good northerly aspect. And once again, there's no footpath, just that raised platform. So what have they done? They've gone out and they've bought some of those plastic hardware store planters, and you can see they've got veggies in them, and then they've got some citrus and olive trees and a bit of trellis, attach the trellis to the wall, and they espalier. So espalier means you grow up and out, but not up and along, but not out. So it's a two-dimensional plant. So they're espaliering citrus and olives. Just a little project I wanted to do.
Right, so just on that point, given that the reality is in the inner city areas that we're sort of talking about, where I'm incredibly familiar with, it's pretty much only your north-facing spaces that you're going to grow in. Do you think councils are sophisticated enough to provide more information around the orientation, the shading? Because you do see stuff.
You'd have to ring up the landscape architect at council.
Yeah. I mean, you do see gardens going.
Or people like Sarah Van Erp. Yeah. 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 Sorry, I'm hurrying through these a bit.
Different mapping as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
This is in the same area. Somebody's made, they're not edibles. I think there's tomatoes in the box, but they've got some sort of vine they've attached on a trellis. Looks nice. That's a Sydney's urban ecologist. And she's just distributed native trigona bees to community gardens. This is in Randwick. And Lance not far from Barrett House. And this is somebody's do-it-yourself garden. They've got huge footpaths which fall for about 1 metre onto the road. And they're all grass, except this person's. And their front yard, one side of it's got like a native plant garden, the other side's like a kitchen garden with vegetables and little fruit trees. But that's their footpath. And once again, they've put in a seat, a simple seat, out of a block of old found hardwood. And so the public can sit in there. What do you think of that? And they scrounged some sandstone from somewhere. No permission from council. But, I mean, with council said, you've got to get rid of this, the people ring up, hello, is that the Southern Courier? We've got a good story for you. Embarrassment. Council's going to do that? This is another good garden. This is in Marrickville. And once again, it shows, it's offset from the street. I think it's about 0.5 metre. It's got about 2 metres from the street trees. It's eucalypt street trees. It's hardwood. It's mulch, so it can, does all that stuff about gardening. Yep. It's mulch. It's organic. It grows food. It belongs to a woman who runs workshops over there and won, I think, Marrickville Council Garden Award last year or the year before. Michelle Margolis. She does. She used to do the permaculture diary. It doesn't exist now. Just the covenant has left, but. She teaches gardening and permaculture, so it runs a whole series of courses in the Inner West Seed Savers group.
When you put out the ag pipe before for watering, one thing that we've got a lot of in the city of Brisbane is a lot of air conditioning vents, and they continually drip water. And that's one good watering.
So their problem is your solution to irrigation.
Most of these, they seem to be reliant on someone to regularly maintain them. Have you got any examples of?
Even those with the irrigation pipes still need to be hand watered sometimes.
That's right, yeah.
Because the rainfall's been quite variable. We've had long, hot, dry periods. But that's Michelle's garden, and if you drive down that street, you can stop and look. This is another thing, this is my last project for the City of Sydney. Waterloo Community Centre, which is a Salvation Army establishment, worked across the road. In the background you can see the high-rise from the Waterloo housing estate, sort of 1960s, very, very high-rise, small apartments. If Ben's not here, is he? Sort of thing he administers. The community centre wanted to do something with the footpath, so I went out, had a look, said there's tons of room, there's no services, I checked. Then I said, well, the city's developing a policy for householders to put up planters. How do you feel like prototyping them? And they said, sure. So they got TAFE Outreach to help build them. These guys from a crew called Hobo Grow were mentors to them. Hobo Grow is based in Darlington, just next to Chippendale. And they're people who've done some training with local mobs. And they're the people who like building vertical gardens in freight pallets and innovative stuff. So they came as mentors, and I think the city funded it. So there's now 4 of these gardens down the road. So what happened was, how am I trying to say? The planters is what I'm getting at. The planters are raised gardens. They're offset. They've got all those offsets I mentioned, but they're container gardens. About 35 centimetres from the bottom is a base. And the idea is that if they need to excavate the footpath, you can get a lifting machine in under it and put it aside and put it back when the works are finished, when the hole's filled up.
So what's the exterior material? Is that a marine?
Marine ply,
Marine.
and this stuff on the corner is freight pellet timber. Of what type, I don't know. So part of it was to help people learn to use tools in the social housing estate and that sort of stuff. So this had a lot of social value. And all these things aren't just about food and urban planning and development. They're about social value too. So they're container gardens, and the model works, so we now know that prototype works. They could have made it longer if they wanted. The maximum length is 3 metres, I think, which would be just too big anyway. You divide that in half. And we mentioned to them about colour to contrast with the footpath, so people could, notice it. We didn't envisage they'll be bright orange, and we didn't envisage they'll put reflectors on them, which is what those white things were. But they wanted to do it, it was fun, and away they went. And we got this character out to do the public launch. And these are all local people filling it up, planting it out, and Costa's there telling them how to make raised gardens.
And how does the drainage work?
There's holes, small holes drilled through the bottom. And we put them down, the side panels go right to the ground, so they're not a repository for syringes and cans underneath.
Yeah, I was just wondering, considering that active volunteer, was there a consideration of doing like a forklift pallet, you know, cut out at the bottom so you could actually lift it? I mean,
Well, you can lift these. That's what we're designed. They're container gardens. There's no contact with the ground.
So how do you get, I can't see how you get underneath the base because I can't see the base.
You just put the forklift things under it. And,
So there are.
yeah, they're not. It's not sufficient on this.
Yeah, that's.
But the width is okay. Yeah. Ideally, you'd make notches where a forklift would go, a periodic. Yeah, that's one of those design improvements to think of after it's been built. But it's a prototype, and that's what you do prototypes for, to see what you can do better. And we now know that those forklift niche notches would be an improvement. Okay, this is at Barrett House, which is just down here in Randwick Council, about a quarter of an hour away. It's half a house which was bequeathed to council, and council retrofitted it as a community meeting space. Lance, I think, uses it a lot. It's free to the public to use for meetings and workshops, and it's got energy and water efficiency fittings, and it's like a showroom. There's this tiny front yard, Randwick front garden, so it's designed as an edible cottage garden on that cottage, traditional English cottage garden model. And then there's a raised planter along the footpath, which was recently taken over. And it was growing this monoculture of agapanthus, which was quickly, well, not quickly, because it's damn awful to remove. It was removed. And so that agapanthus garden is now this food garden. Not a sign of agapanthus, they're further along, but that's another project. So you can see it's called Barrett House Foragers Garden. In the sign says you people are free to take. So you can see where all the leaves have been clipped off with people with scissors. So obviously nothing irritating for children there. But it's become a playground. You can see they've got terracotta roofing tile from demolition sites, aggregate, to make the path. The path is designed, it comes off the footpath and up to this area where there's already a fruiting lemon tree, which was planted by the mayors a few years ago. 3 bananas which were donated. There was a pawpaw which died in winter's winds. So it's like a little tree garden area. And the rest is just herbs and veggies. This was a memorial to the guy who lived in Barrett House, who was an early Australian 1920s filmmaker, Todd Barrett. But it looks different, doesn't it, than the agapanthus garden?
I live not far from here, and I did a mission the other night to offload some compost into the bin and met somebody. It's like, you know, having a chat. It's like, oh wow, compost bin. So
Yeah.
there's that kind of dynamic happening.
Exactly. The first Thursday of each month, this is open for the public, and there's often people there to talk about home energy. In fact, I think, David, you've done a stunt there as an energy auditor. Yeah. Yeah, so, and people can have a look around and talk to different people. People can come and help garden if they want to. Are you hurrying us up? Okay. There was an error bin in the garden, and Fiona here looked in it to clean it one day and found it has a classic error bin problem. It's the same that happened to the 7 bins, one for each day of the week in Peace Park in Chippendale, full of cockroaches. Because error bins are insulated. They're highly efficient, and they've got foam insulation in them, and they've got that funnel thing David was talking about.
So I didn't even mention the cockroaches and the fact
Yeah.
that I went to every single bin in Chippendale at one point to try and get usable compost on them.
They're a great place for breeding colonies of cockroaches, if you want them.
Warps over time, so they don't see the cockroach.
And they breed in between the foam and the wall and in the bottom. So Fiona looked at it, and the compost was pretty poor. She just dismantled it. And I don't know what's happened to it. It's probably here. Probably gave it to Helen over there on council.
Our compost expert in the Blue Mountains just drills holes through these bins.
Yeah. Well, these are standard old Getty bins, and there's no cockroach breeding colonies. Much more efficient, easy to use. So locals, you see them, they come along and they put their compost in there. And as you've got to do in all this, you've got to have interpretive signage, how to use the bin. So next to it's a garbage bin with dry material, because if you know about making compost, you've got to have a lot of carbon material and a bit of kitchen scraps. So people put their kitchen scraps in, and they take some of this dry material, straw or leaf from the park, and throw some handfuls of that in to get that mix of compost, carbon and nitrogen. So that's been a better solution.
Do you have any water close by the bins as well?
Yeah, just bring a hose over from the front yard of Barrett House.
Okay, sure. So the community does.
Each month on that open day, it's maintained.
Okay.
So this is Fiona just about to discover the, and you can see in the bin, you can see a lot of stuff just hasn't broken down. Paper, corn husks, you know. The thing disappeared after that. It was taken to pieces. That's the Footpath Garden. So it was an established garden. There's a hedge to separate it from the road. There's a park next door. And it's just a small thing, but it's more interesting and people like it. And what you find is that kids are turned into a playground. They see the path and they get up here and they run along and they run back. And so it's become a playground. Nobody planned for that to happen. And it's just as well, because I'm not sure if it would work if you planned for it. That's on the tours on Sunday if you're going to the eastern suburbs too, but you can see that any time. Oh, that's just a sign. So people know, you've got to tell people what's going on. How's council spending your money? As it says, the plants are organic growing. They're not sprayed with synthetic chemicals, but washed before eating. People ignore that, but you've got to think about dogs piddling in there. So it's good to wash it. And then connection to all the workshops which take place. And tell people to take, they just pick leaves, not the whole lettuce, just some leaves. People think you've got to take the whole plant. This is what happens if you ignore your footpath garden and you leave your bike there for a long time. And local, this is actually a rain garden. It's designed to take water off the streets, which is hydrocarbon contaminated. And in it there's filters of soil, sand and gravel. So it's a filtration, what they call a biofilter. And then it takes that purified water back into the drain. And the drain ends up in Sydney Harbour. So it's a means of getting heavy pollutants out of the, before it gets into the natural system again. But locals, being in Chippendale, they thought of it as a garden. Now, I'm not sure if you, a pumpkin vine's probably no harm, but if you plant a tree in there, you're going to start churning those layers, filtration layers. So maybe these rain gardens aren't the best for tree crops. Well, it's got to be plants that can survive ages and ages of hot summer without irrigation and inundation. They usually use really hardy native plants. But the locals have put, there's a lemongrass in the background there, there's a pumpkin vine, and that whoever left that bike there, that was there for months. I noticed somebody's taken it. They probably saw it as abandoned. But it was getting overgrown. That wasn't a set-up photo. Oh, that's the end of that. So, any comments? Because Fiona's winding us up. I've tried to be as quick as I can. I've spoken at double speed.
Thank you.